Ladies and gentlemen, I am the American SpyFox. Welcome to the newest edition of the Nirvana series where we study the Kurt Cobain case. Before we begin the video, I would like to thank Tom Grant for emailing me and clarifying some things. I wanted to know how many notes, how many supposed letters from Kurt to Courtney or Kurt to whoever were involved in the case. Traditionally, how many notes? And he emailed me, he went over each one. There were 4 notes: the letter from Rome, the one that Courtney says was left under her pillow, the letter from Cali and Kurt that Tom and Dylan would find on the stairwell, and of course what I call the resignation letter, which news channels called the, this is what it is letter. Recently, I started diving into a new book that I had never read before, Mark Yarm's Everybody Loves Our Town, An Oral History of Grunge. All this is, as you can see, a very thick book, a huge compilation of interviews with the people who were there. Not only the famous musicians like Kurt and Cornell and Susan Silver and Chris Novoselic and all those people that we know, but all the other bands and all their friends who were there and witnessed all of these things happening. There's even a chapter dedicated to March and April, the last 2 months of Kurt's life. They talk about what happened up to the memorial service, at the memorial service. These were things that I didn't know before. In this book, I discovered that in Courtney Love's own words, there is a 5th letter, and what Courtney refers to as the very first attempt of Cobain in hurting himself. I was so astonished when I came across this information because it's the one time that Courtney is very detailed, and she even names names of people. And I ran it past Tom Grant, and he confirmed with me that he had never heard of this note before. Mark Yarm's collection of interviews, this book, is the only place Courtney ever mentions the 5th letter, what she actually called the first letter, and the first attempt that happened even before Rome. This is the only place I've ever heard Courtney talk about it, but she is very detailed because the author was smart enough to probe her and ask her follow-up questions, forcing her to name names and describe details. So what you're going to discover, what I discovered, I'm going to show it to you, and then we're all going to be like, what the F? How did nobody know this? Why is this not being used as evidence in court against her? It is irrefutable evidence that Courtney Love lied about Kurt Cobain being the S word. Essentially, to help the viewer understand how significant this is and what it proves, we need to recap. We're going to go over all the letters associated with the Cobain case, and we will come to what Courtney says in this book was actually the first letter that no one's ever heard of until now. Or at least I'd never heard of it, and I confirmed with Tom Grant that he'd never heard of it because neither one of us had ever read this book that Courtney so enthusiastically put her thoughts into in her own freaking words, completely contradicting herself. And it's serious. Once we get to it, it's very serious. It could be used as actual evidence in court. It was a piece of media, a piece of journalism that has just been totally overlooked by everyone, including me, up until recently. I'd also like to thank Tom Grant for the recordings. I am relying heavily on the recordings of 90s private investigator Tom Grant, including 1 or 2 of them that I'd guarantee 95% of us had never heard before because they're not soaked in bleach, they're not in any of the documentaries. They kind of seem inconsequential to the whole big picture, but in order for me to prove a couple points, I need to use these lesser known recordings. So you're probably going to hear Courtney talk about things you've never heard her talk about. Having said all that, there is a GoFundMe going on right now that you can help out with if you'd like to see me take our Kurt Cobain petition to Seattle. Right now is the perfect time. Why? Because the Seattle coroner, the chief medical examiner, just retired. There's a brand new chief coroner coming in, out with the old guard, in with the new, and that's the person I want to physically take our petition to and let it plop down on his desk with a thud as he sees this stack of papers filled with nearly 10,000 signatures from around the world. I want to strike while the iron's hot. I want his very first major issue to be our petition. I want him to hear the sound of thousands of names slam down on his desk. I don't make a lot of money from this channel. I could never afford to go out and do this on my own. If you can help me get to Seattle as well, I would like to go to Montesano, where I would talk to a couple people in Kurt's family. I'd like to go to Aberdeen. There's a couple places I want to go there. This would all be documented and recorded, including a conversation with the chief medical examiner in the King County Coroner's Office. And I would bet you that he has been briefed on what to do about questions about the Kurt Cobain case. Well, I don't want to approach this guy like a jerk. I want to show him the petition. I want to show him how many people still care, and I want to make sure he sees it, because after all, what good is a petition just sitting online? Eventually, you got to do something with the petition. You got to take it to the people who care. You got to take it to the people who can do something, right? And it just so happens, like I said, there's a brand new chief medical examiner. Who knows? They might be completely open to dialogue. They might sit down and have an entire recorded conversation with me about the case. Won't know till we try, and I can't get there without your help. If you can donate, I'm not asking for much. It's not a vacation. I'm just asking for enough money to get out there, get a rental car and a hotel, and that's it. So I can do my thing and document this trip, which I will show to you after it's done. And then we'll know. For everyone who signed that petition, you can say, I signed this petition. The person who started it took it to the person that needed to see it, and he tried. At least you and I can say, we did everything within our power to make sure that some kind of justice was handed out. Even Tom Grant himself signed this petition. So we've got some backup from people who were there. Be a part of history. Even if you are not in a situation where you can donate for the GoFundMe for me to get there, you can still sign the petition. It's still ongoing. Until I print that thing out, which will be the morning I leave, anyone can still sign it. Links are below. Other than that, yes, there is a bit of recapping in this video for newer viewers. Maybe there's some people who haven't watched the entire Nirvana series, but other than that, I hope you enjoy the video, and you're probably going to get the most out of it if you watch most of it. It's a pretty long video. I've been working on it for a while. I put a lot of thought and effort into it. Hope you enjoy.
Those cases you see on 48 Hours and 2020 and all that, when people say, why haven't the police done anything, etc. In most of those cases, when the police have made an arrest, and even later when Alan Dershowitz or somebody comes along and proves with DNA evidence that the person that is sitting on death row is innocent, and they finally get released, and they even put somebody else in prison who admits to committing the crime, they go back to the original detectives and prosecutors, and those people still refuse to admit that they made a mistake. It's political. They don't want to look like a fool. They want to get promoted, and it's human nature.
The week began with good news on Kurt Cobain, lead singer of Nirvana, when he was released from the American hospital in Rome on Monday. According to a hospital spokesperson, the 27-year-old singer was back to normal and doing fine. Doctors have said that Cobain would not suffer any permanent damage. The singer, who was in Rome taking a break from the group's European tour, lapsed into a coma late last week after overdosing on tranquilizers and alcohol.
I've been making videos and doing the LA thing and the New York thing and being all glamorous. And meanwhile, he's been playing like Slovenia, right? And he got real depressed, and he wrote basically a suicide note. There's no real other way. He claims he was leaving me.
Do you still have all the notes, the note from Rome and the original note here?
Yeah, Detective Cameron gave me back the note from Rome, and he said, I would destroy this if I were you. It's not going to do you any good.
Why would somebody tell you to get rid of that?
Because it wasn't really nice. They talked about getting a divorce.
In the heat of an argument, people will often say things to each other that they don't really mean, perhaps just to hurt the other person's feelings. But how often does a person sit down, think about what they want to say, and then write out a formal request for dissolution? If Courtney's telling us the truth, Detective Cameron has discovered that his dead spouse, only 3 weeks prior, requested divorce. Either Detective Donald Cameron is the worst homicide investigator to ever carry a badge, or Courtney Love is lying. Or maybe a little bit of both. Any seasoned homicide detective would want to keep this. Either A, to back his theory that the dead spouse was indeed depressed enough to take their own life, or B, just in case foul play was involved. This is not a piece of evidence that any detective would give back to the person who gave it to them. This is why it is so hard to believe Courtney Love when she says there was a note present in the first place. Personally, I believe there was no love lost between Don Cameron and addicts. He was dealing with a lot of them in Seattle almost on a daily basis. So yes, I do believe he glossed over the investigation. However, I refuse to believe that a seasoned homicide detective would ignore such a letter as this. As for note number 1, I'm torn between two conclusions. I think there's a really good chance that Kurt did write her a letter. He was telling friends he wanted a divorce. This would come up again in a few weeks, right before his death. However, it's just so hard to believe that Donald Cameron saw the letter and did not keep it or at least copy it for evidence. I think maybe it's possible the letter was real, that it had nothing to do with suicide, nor do I believe that it was left on the edge of the bed where he was found passed out. That story Courtney spun well after his death, never before his death, only after his death. I think that he just wrote her a letter saying he wanted a divorce because he had tried to verbally communicate it to her and she wasn't having it. Once he called Rosemary Carroll, his entertainment attorney, and Rosemary did admit that Kurt did call her and say, draw up divorce papers, he decided, I don't want to deal with Courtney. I'm going to write it to her in a letter. My own personal conclusion with note number 1, the Rome letter, is as follows. It was about divorce, and Courtney just told Tom about the letter, but never actually showed it to Don Cameron. What do you think? I'd love to know in the comments. As you guys know, I like to do things in chronological order for anyone who's jumping into the series for the first time, but in this video, I'll try to stay in order, but there will be a little bit of jumping around. Having said that, before we get to the second note, which is the note that Cali would supposedly leave for Kurt that Tom Grant would find on the stairwell August 7th, the second night he was in the home. We're going to talk about something that happened after Rome, but before Kurt would be found, and how it ties in to Kurt's memorial service after he's found. After the Rome incident, Courtney would do something that she'd never done before, and something that really shocked Seattle scenester and manager Susan Silver. Courtney calls Susan Silver just a couple weeks before Kurt's found. This will all tie together. Susan ends up at the memorial service. There's a lot to this, so follow along. That's right, you heard correct. In March of '94, Courtney Love would call Susan Silver. Now, if you don't know who Susan Silver is, pretty amazing woman in the music industry. She had underground credentials. She had mainstream credentials. She managed Soundgarden. She managed Alice in Chains. She was married to Chris Cornell. They had their first daughter together. This woman was very well connected. And if you follow Courtney Love's career, you know that Courtney Love does not like other women who are successful in the music industry. It's just the way she is. When she was acting in Hollywood, she would hate on other female actresses. It's just the way she is. Susan Silver was on Courtney's shit list, and Susan knew this. Susan herself said she was quite surprised to hear from Courtney Love. Now, aside from the superficial, shallow, petty fact that Courtney Love hates on all other women in the music industry because she doesn't want to compete with them. She wants to ruin their careers. There is a much more personal reason that Courtney and even Kurt disdained Susan Silver. And that is talked about by Susan herself in Everybody Loves Our Town. If you're a Nirvana fan, chances are you know about the Vanity Fair article written by Lynn Hirschberg, which resulted in Frances Bean being temporarily taken from Kurt and Courtney. Within that article, Lynn Hirschberg talks about inside sources that told her Courtney was doing heroin after she found out she was pregnant. Now, Courtney would go on to say, I did do heroin during the first trimester, but once I found out I was pregnant, I stopped. It's always been debated whether she really stopped or not. It caused Kurt Cobain immense personal agony, not to mention being publicly humiliated. MTV would even report on Vanity Fair's article, making it a much bigger story. That inside source that Lynn Hirschberg talked about, well, Courtney convinced Kurt that the inside source was Susan Silver. Kurt was so upset about it, he even mentioned it in a song. My favorite inside source, I'll kiss your open sores. Appreciate your concern, you're gonna stink and burn. He was talking about Susan Silver because for whatever reason, Courtney decided that that was the person who talked to Lynn Hirschberg. Susan Silver says otherwise. Danny Goldberg called me at one point saying, I'm just calling on Kurt and Courtney's behalf. They really want you to stop talking to people. He didn't specifically say Vanity Fair. Somebody else told me that I was supposedly a quote-unquote source, which I wasn't. So, in Kurt and Courtney's mind, whether it's true or not, their baby has been taken from them because of Susan Silver. So keep that in mind as we go through the rest of this story. Imagine how much disdain you might have for someone who caused you to lose your baby, even if it was just temporarily. In an interview for the book, Everybody Loves Our Town, An Oral History of Grunge by Mark Yarm, Susan Silver would tell us this. I was driving when I got the news about Kurt, and I remember the first feeling that I had was the same feeling that I had when Lennon was shot, when it was this huge physical shock and then this overwhelming sense of compassion and protection towards Yoko, and in this case, towards Courtney. Regardless of the antics that I'd observed over the years and the mysterious disdain that she had for me. These were the first two excerpts from her interviews that I wanted you to hear. We need to establish that Susan knows Courtney does not like her. They're not friends. Now check this out. Susan Silver. Courtney and I had touched base several weeks before Kurt died. after there was an incident. So she's talking about the Rome incident. She had reached out and said, you have to help. You have to help. He's going to kill himself. So I hooked them up with a person that we'd been dealing with Lane, for intervention. They ended up not using him. They did do an intervention, but it did not go particularly well. Now, you're probably saying to yourself, well, American SpyFox, you always say that Courtney never said Kurt was going to hurt himself until after he was found, until after he died, not before. Well, let's clear this up. Susan says she hooked them up with someone they had used with Lane. So we can discern that what Courtney's telling Susan is Kurt's going to hurt himself with drugs, because Susan suggests a doctor for an intervention. Let's get this straight. This is not Courtney saying, I think he's going to physically harm himself. She is telling Susan, I think that he's going to hurt himself with his use. However, Courtney can still later say, well, I told people that he was going to hurt himself, right?
Sean?
Yeah.
Is this the most insane case you've had for a long time?
It's pretty bizarre. It's probably even more bizarre than what you realize it is.
How do you mean?
Oh, there's just so many crazy twists and so many things going on here.
It's just so weird that I called you and then I thought he was suicidal and now he's dead. It's just...
Have you even been back home?
I was home for the funeral. I was home for 2 weeks, and then I started doing drugs, and I was like, look, I can't do drugs. I gotta get out of here.
It's very manipulative. It's very deceptive on Courtney's part. And you might be asking yourself, why in the world would she call the one woman that she believed was a source for her losing her baby due to heroin use? Why would you call that woman and now say to her, we're doing way too much heroin. Can you help us? Does that make any sense? If Courtney truly believed that Susan Silver, who she convinced Kurt that it was Susan, if she really believed it was Susan who talked to Lynn Hirschberg, she would be the last person that she would contact for help, right? Not to mention, they're rich and famous with management. They don't need to call another manager. She could just call Danny Goldberg, who's supposed to be there to do anything they want. They have unlimited resources. Why is Courtney calling the one woman who she might as well just call the children's services on herself? So why would Courtney call someone like Susan Silver and say such a thing? Could it be because Susan Silver talks to everyone in the music industry except for Kurt Cobain? Why does she not talk to Kurt Cobain? Because Courtney made Kurt believe that Susan was the reason they lost their baby. So of course Kurt's never going to speak to Susan, and Susan's never going to try to speak to Kurt. However, Susan talks to everyone. She knows everyone. So she knows Susan is going to go around after the fact, or maybe even before the fact, saying Courtney is in fear for Kurt's life. This also proves to me that regardless of Courtney convincing Kurt it was Susan Silver who was the inside source, Courtney never truly believed that it was Susan. That was just the one woman in the music industry who was highly successful that she wanted to turn Kurt against. Whoever she didn't like, whoever she wanted to ruin, or maybe just ruin their day, she knew how much influence and what a big voice Kurt Cobain had, so she would turn Kurt against them, just out of spite. I believe at the end of their marriage and what would be the end of his life, Kurt had finally realized that Courtney did this to him, that she would turn him against people who were actually good for him, people who were actually his friends. She isolated him. That's what sociopaths do with their partners. They isolate them from the rest of the world so they can have full control of them. I watched my stepfather do this to my mother for 30 years. It's the reason I don't know any of my family members, because once he got control of her, she wasn't even allowed to speak to her own family anymore. He turned her against everyone who ever cared about her, and I lost out on a family, an extended family, because of it. I've seen this shit in real time, in real life. This is what Courtney did to Kurt. After successfully isolating Kurt from everybody who cared about him,
people like Courtney Love latched on, and then we were kind of out of the picture. She didn't like me from the get-go, so it didn't surprise me that I was pushed to the background.
She can now go to someone who talks to everybody with this concern, knowing that they will tell everyone in the music industry about her concern, and she can later spin it to say he was depressed, he was suicidal, when really what she was saying is, I need a good doctor for a drug intervention. This goes deeper and it gets stranger. Hang with me. How many of you were aware that the woman who Kurt probably died believing was the source of his public humiliation and shame over his baby and their parental rights is the woman who set up his memorial service? How ironic. Not his wife, not his management, who is supposed to take care of his every need, nor his mother, who claimed that
he and I were best friends.
They were best friends in Montage of Heck. Susan Silver set up the memorial service. A few of us started to talk, and there certainly was a need for a public gathering and a private gathering. It occurred to me that it would be a good idea to have the private service at the same time as the public gathering so that the public did not try to find the private service. There was a church near downtown Seattle that I'd gone to a few times, and I called and I said, this is what happened in this community. The reverberations are international. There's a real need for a safe place and a smallish group of people to come together and have a service, and they were really open to it. Let me remind you that Courtney Love was so well prepared for the public service.
Some assignments are tougher than others. This is one of the toughest. Attending the Kurt Cobain Memorial at Seattle Center, some 10,000 people in this area. It used to be the site of the World's Fair, right underneath the Space Needle. And they've come here out of grief and frustration, some of them out of anger at being abandoned by one of their heroes. Everybody came for one reason, to pay their respects to Kurt Cobain.
All the kids who gathered in the park and stormed the water fountain and brought their candles and cried and chanted. She was so well prepared for that she pre-recorded herself reading a part of this supposed letter. And oh, by the way, we've talked about that and how she changed I have it good to I had it good while she was reading it. She was ready for the public outpouring of sympathy and attention, but she was not prepared for any kind of memorial service for Kurt.
Not long after her taped message was played for her husband's mourners, Courtney Love herself showed up at the vigil to talk to fans personally.
So you really go from the best spiritual place you can, for his sake.
Interesting enough, she told the funeral home, and this is what made the Seattle journalist Richard Lee originally suspicious, that she wanted his body cremated as soon as possible, but had not even set up a memorial service for the guy. And by the way, the first responding officer, John Fisk, who was interviewed in the documentary film Soaked in Bleach, said you could still recognize Kurt. Courtney could have allowed his friends and family to see him one last time. They could have had an open casket memorial, but she made sure that the body was destroyed before the memorial service even began. Don't you find that interesting? That she had absolutely no thought to set up the memorial, which can be forgiven for a grieving widow. But why did she have concern for making sure the body was destroyed? If you're a grieving widow and you don't want to think about it at all and somebody else takes care of everything, I get it. But why would you make sure the body was destroyed but not even think to set up a memorial? Clearly, she called the funeral home. Clearly, she was talking to them. And her only concern was get rid of the body? I imagine that Susan Silver was probably played by Courtney without realizing it. And she was probably feeling a bit guilty. She was probably thinking, hey, that call I got a week and a half ago from Courtney about Kurt, maybe I should have taken that a little more seriously. Maybe I should have tried a little harder to help them out. And maybe that guilt is what made her think, Courtney, I'll take care of the memorial service. You don't worry about anything. Well, Courtney was still worrying about something. She made sure that body was gone, let Susan do everything else, but as long as Courtney gets what she wants, everyone else can clean up the mess, right? Now, you might think that's the end of the story, but it's not. You'd think after the phone call, after Courtney reaching out to this one person for intervention help, and then her going as far as to set up the memorial service so Courtney didn't have to deal with it, you would think Courtney would appreciate Susan Silver, that they might even become friends. Well, you'd be wrong. Listen to what Susan has to say about the day of the memorial. At the end of the service, I went up to offer my condolences to Courtney, and she saw me coming and just turned her back to me and closed this circle of people she was talking with. So obviously she wasn't interested in any sort of contact, which is fine. It certainly wasn't a day about our potential friendship. Potential friendship. Why do you think Susan would use those words, our potential friendship? Well, maybe because out of all the people in the world that Courtney could have called, she reached out to her, and then she went out of her way to ensure that Courtney didn't have to do anything for the memorial service. You might expect maybe just a tiny ounce of gratitude. You might expect a normal person to say, thank you for everything you did for me during this trying time in my life. Not Courtney Love. Courtney's done with Susan. She's already served her purpose. And while we're on the subject, I want to just go a little bit further. I want to recount an anecdote from a person who was actually at the memorial service. I want to talk about Kurt's memorial service real quick. And then I want to talk about those infamous days where Courtney was out in the park outside their house giving kids Kurt's clothes, and she was on MTV and all that. We're going to get another account from somebody who was actually there and saw what was going on. During Kurt's memorial service, there was a person named Elizabeth Davis Simpson at the memorial service, and this is what she said. The thing that I remember most about the funeral was Courtney spoke and she quoted from the Bible from Job, and I was really blown away by her ability to speak so eloquently under duress. Your husband just passed away. You were on TV choking up, crying. Courtney, who has always claimed that she chants and she's a Buddhist and she has no concept of what Buddhism is really all about.
And I'm in New York to fucking see the Dalai Lama. Thank you very much.
Because it's about giving up earthly pleasures, right? Not seeking them. Courtney quotes from the Christian Bible. She took time to find something in the Bible and eloquently perform it at Kurt's memorial service, where most widows wouldn't even be able to speak because they're so choked up they can't even talk. They're out of their minds. Family members are offering them Valium and Xanax because they're afraid the woman might have a panic attack. Courtney speaks eloquently and quotes from the Bible. Amazing. Does that sound like a grieving widow to you? It sounds like a performance to me. I have another account, a first-hand account of someone who lived near the park, Veretta Park, close to Kurt's house, who actually witnessed Courtney being filmed by MTV and news cameras, and he witnessed everything that was going down while she came out to talk to the kids and started giving Kurt's stuff away. This is what he has to say. His name, John Leighton Beezer. He lived near the park, near Kurt's house, and he decided to go over there. You could see their house on the other side of this hedge, and their windows were open, and the kids are talking really loud, just like tourists. There was a bunch of kids there. We all saw the MTV footage. People were gathering in the park. So he goes over and he says, have some respect. There's a widow and a child in there. After a few moments, a security guy came through the hedge and said, hey, you guys need to keep it down. We're not asking you to leave or anything, but out of respect for the family, for Kurt's family and Courtney, you really should keep it quiet. A few minutes later, Courtney and Kurt's mom come out, and this was really weird. They both struck me as if they were high on drugs. Kurt's mom, in particular, looked really, really high. She seemed very peaceful and okay with everything, and she rarely talked. I came to realize Courtney was just a media whore. Even though she'd just lost her husband to a violent suicide, she liked the fact that there were people coming to see her. She had some stuff, a sweater, and a pair of rolled-up socks. Courtney basically said, hey, I've got some stuff of Kurt's, and I guess I won't need it anymore. So if you guys want it, you can have it. In retrospect, I should have grabbed the sweater. The guy next to me did. It just seemed really disrespectful that she was giving away his clothes. You know, if you had a guitar pick of his, that would be nice. That would seem more appropriate. But no, I don't want a pair of rolled up socks that was in his sock drawer when he blew his head off. He continues with his account. And remember, guys, he was there when the footage you're seeing took place. He was watching all this go down. Then Courtney sat down next to a tree with the mother. Now, they didn't film Wendy. For some reason, I saw the MTV footage. They like focused on Courtney. I don't even think they knew who Wendy was. And like this guy said, Wendy wasn't even crying. Wendy looked peaceful. He said Wendy looked like she was having a good time, high on drugs. And we all know that Wendy, according to Kurt's grandpa, Leland Cobain, Wendy didn't even want anything to do with Kurt until he became famous. Courtney was saying things to the kids like, you guys really need to love each other and just appreciate that people are in your lives. What I eventually concluded was that she wanted a huge outpouring of kids in that park. That she wanted some kind of don't forget Kurt movement to spring up around their house, and she was chumming the waters. Basically, oh yeah, if you go there at night, Courtney comes out and gives you some of his stuff. Really? Wow, let's get 100 of our friends and go there and chant Kurt's name and hold candles and talk about how great and beautiful Courtney is. I mean, it was twisted. I felt like an alien visitor. It was so horribly wrong. This dude goes on to talk about how he could tell Courtney and Kurt's mother were actually enjoying the attention they were getting because of Kurt's death. They were welcoming people. It gets even worse. One last thing that I want to read to you from Everybody Loves Our Town, Marco Collins, and then we will move on to the next note, and eventually we're going to get to that note that no one's ever heard of, except for Courtney talked about it in this book. That night after the memorial, Courtney was with Kat from Babes in Toyland, and she was loaded as fuck. And I remember my radio station called me and said, Courtney is downstairs in a limo. She wants to come up, and all she's saying on the phone is, I want to come up there and make you guys stop playing fucking Smashing Pumpkins and play Kurt. We had been doing 24-hour Nirvana, and at that point, we'd started playing other bands again. The ratings on something like that would be monster. She wanted to use our station as a place to mourn on the air. She does everything in public, that's for sure. I remember going, fuck no, man. She's going to say a bunch of shit she'll regret later. I was like, just tell her to call me. And she called me, but she was loaded, slurring. There's no fucking way I was going to let her go on the air at that point. It would have been a fucking crime. My God, I wish he would have done it. This woman loved the attention from Kurt's demise so much that she had a limo drive her to a radio station, and she wanted to go on the air and talk about herself being sad about Kurt. She fucking loved it. People who are truly grieving want to be left alone. Don't look at me. Don't talk to me. I just want to be left alone, or I at least just want to be with those who are closest to me. This woman was inviting news stations to her house. She was inviting strangers to her house. She was driving 24 hours later. When everybody went away, she had a limo driver take her to a radio station where she tried to speak on the air about it. Tell me this woman didn't love every second of it. Susan Silver was so well respected in the music community that she was kind of like the mom. Okay, like I know she was Chris's wife, but there's even a story in the book about how Mike Starr, big ass Mike Starr, pissed on a wall in a bar, and Susan took him out by the ear, scolded him, and made him go back in and clean it up. Those male musicians in Seattle, they respected Susan Silver. Courtney knew this, and that's why she called Susan Silver just a couple weeks, conveniently, before Kurt would end up dead. She called the one woman that she knew would spread it around that Courtney was worried about Kurt. If that's not thinking ahead on your alibi, I don't know what is. Kurt, I can't believe you managed to be in this house without me noticing. You're a fucking asshole for not calling Courtney and at least letting her know that you're okay. She's in a lot of pain, Kurt, and this morning she had another incident and now she's in the hospital again. She's your wife, and she loves you, and you have a child together. Get it together to at least tell her you're okay, or she is going to die. It's not fair, man. Do something now.
When I first found the letter, I had no doubt that Cali had written it, but it still looked strange to me. You know, the letter just didn't make sense. It looked phony.
Right, well, it's itself, I mean, it was not written by, it wasn't a sincere letter.
Right, yeah, it sounded like
I thought Cali wrote it because he knew that Kurt was dead.
Well, that refers to a letter that was found on the stairs the second time we went to the house. It wasn't there the first time Dylan and I went there the first night on Wednesday night, but on Thursday night, all of a sudden there's this letter written by Callie, the male nanny, sitting on the stairway. And Courtney's own attorney agreed with me, and she knew Callie very well also. But it just read phony. There's a copy of it in the case study manual. If you look it over, anybody with any brains can tell that this was written for me to find. That was the only purpose of that letter.
This was written for me to find. That's the only purpose of that letter. I have to say that I tend to agree with Tom Grant, but let's do as he says. Let's analyze the note. He says anybody who looks at it with any bit of brains can see it was meant for me to find. Let's think about it for a second. Callie is supposed to be Kurt's close friend. Courtney even says that he tried to dress like Kurt. He wanted to be like Kurt.
And his dad, you know, there was this whole intervention thing with Gary. It was like he was trying to turn into Kurt or something, you know. And the reason Kurt liked him was because he was happy and funny, and believe it or not, he was
believe
really
me, if
fucking
Callie wasn't involved in this at all, I'm the first one that wants to get him out of it, and we can do it really quick by just doing a polygraph.
Yeah, she was talking about Callie. In case you didn't understand what she was saying, she said he started to dress like Kurt, started to act like Kurt. It's like he wanted to be Kurt. So, back to the note. If Callie is such a great friend of Kurt and loves him so much, why is he taking this sort of tone with Kurt in this note? Why is Callie so angry at Kurt? Why is he not talking to him like a friend? Why does he not want to help Kurt? It seems like he's completely on Courtney's side and not being a friend to Kurt at all. He seems angry at Kurt. Could he have been jealous of Kurt? We need to be taking a strong look at Callie, okay? He is suspect numero uno. I want to share with you another Grant recording, and I think I can answer what Grant asked all those years ago.
I don't think that he was out at Carnation, and I don't know why Courtney's trying so hard to convince people that he was. She's got the police convinced because they're saying that that's where they think he was for a couple of days. You know
what's amazing is that she can do this, you know?
Previously on my channel, Tom Grant recounted the Carnation story. If you have not watched that video, go ahead, check it out when you get a chance. He recounts a story in which him and Cap Jelen and Courtney Love go out to Carnation. Now, Courtney was obsessed with the Carnation cabin. Kurt had to be at the Carnation cabin. Well, I have some speculation. I have a little theory for why Courtney felt it was so important to convince people Kurt was out at the Carnation cabin by himself. And it has to do with Cali DeWitt and what she knows Cali did to Kurt. Cali wrote this note in which he left on the stairwell, obviously for Tom Grant to find, angry at Kurt, acting as if he had not seen Kurt. He left it on the 7th. Why do we know it was the 7th? Because Tom was at the house on the 6th and he went upstairs and the note was not on the stairwell. But the next night on the 7th it was. That means Cali left it after Grant had left the home on the 6th. Now, Jessica Hopper tells us that on the morning of the 7th, Cali wakes her up and says, "You're leaving today." There was a car sitting in the driveway waiting for Jessica. She recounted the whole story. She had no clue why she was leaving or where she was going, but Cali said, "Today you're leaving. Goodbye." Now, why would Cali get rid of Jessica Hopper before he placed that note on the stairwell? Well, I think it's pretty simple. Because he's acting as if he has not seen Kurt in the house. But Jessica knew that they did speak to Kurt in the house way back on the 2nd when he came home from rehab. So he did not want Jessica Hopper to see this note because she would have said, "Cali, we saw Kurt. Why are you pretending as though you've never seen Kurt in this house in the past week?" Why would Cali leave this note on the stairwell that Grant himself says, "I'm suspicious of this note. It doesn't feel right." Why would he leave that acting as if he had not seen Kurt when we later would find out that he and Jessica Hopper actually talked to Kurt on the 2nd, 5 days previously? Well, because Cali was around Kurt those days and Cali had something to do with Kurt's death. But if you convince the police that Kurt was not at the house during the days Cali was there, then they're not suspicious of Cali. That's why Courtney wanted the police and the media to believe Kurt had isolated himself at the cabins to explain supposedly why Cali and Kurt never crossed paths in the same fucking house. They did cross paths. They were in the same house. Cali was there when Kurt died. He knew that Kurt was dead. He left the note as a part of the scheme to make people believe Kurt was not in the house. He was out at Carnation. And she was successful. As you heard Tom Grant say to Rosemary Carroll, the police were saying that Kurt was not seen at his house because he isolated himself out at his Carnation cabin. That's what the police believed. Therefore, the police will never question Cali DeWitt about being in the same house as Kurt Cobain because they have been led to believe that Kurt wasn't even in the house. If Kurt Cobain was going to do what they said he did, why wouldn't he do it out at the cabin where no one would hear the gunshot and his daughter would not have to come home to this terrible scene with a bunch of strangers milling about her property, right? Most people who do these things isolate themselves. They often will go out into the middle of the woods. Hell, Japan even has a forest specifically for this purpose. It's like a thing. If you're going to do this, don't let your family see it. Go out here and do it. We'll find you later. Why would he go and isolate himself for days at a cabin in the woods and then say, "Oh, I'm going to go home to do this"? It makes absolutely no sense. But believe it or not, Courtney Love convinced the Barney Fife SPD that that's exactly what happened. And that's why Cali didn't run into Kurt. That note was placed there for people to believe that Cali did not run into Kurt Cobain in his own house. Therefore, Cali had nothing to do with it. He's not a suspect. Courtney wanted the police to believe that Kurt was at the cabin as to collaborate Cali's note, to make it seem as though Cali's note makes sense. But we know it doesn't make sense because Jessica Hopper told us Cali spoke with Cobain on the 2nd. He knew that Cobain was there. And Tom knows that Cali knows more than he's telling. Did you know that at one point, Courtney Love herself said that she thought Cali knew more than he was saying? This might be a recording. You've probably never heard this before.
But I believe you when you tell me that he knows something, and I truly believe that in my heart. I know he does.
Yeah.
You know he does.
Sure.
You know, and I don't know what the hell it is. I think that he might have heard the gunshot, is what I think. If you're seeing the 3rd, I think he might have heard the gunshot.
I think
he was fucking terrified.
I think he knew Kurt was dead. You know, I'm almost positive he knew Kurt was dead before it came out, before the electrician found him.
Gosh.
And that's what I want to clarify.
I hope to hell that he didn't see it. I think he might have heard the gunshot, is what I'm thinking. I mean, that's what my gut instinct tells me. Poor baby, poor Kurt. I mean, he was Kurt's closest friend.
So here we have Courtney Love telling Tom Grant that she also believes Cali knows something, that he lied. Why is she not angry at Cali? At the end, she says, "Poor Kurt, poor Cali. By the way, this is the only time I have ever heard Courtney Love in all of Grant's recordings, and I've listened to them for hours. It's the only time I've ever heard Courtney Love give Kurt Cobain any sympathy. But she also gives sympathy to Cali, which made no sense to me. If you truly believe that he lied to you about your spouse's death, she even says, I hope he didn't see it. Right? If you think Cali may have been there, he knew something, but he didn't tell you, why wouldn't you be angry? Why are you showing sympathy to Cali? And even at the end, she clarifies and says he was supposed to be Kurt's friend. So why isn't she mad at him? Think about it. Tom Grant took Courtney Love right to the edge with his questioning. She almost gave in, but she knew if I throw Cali under the bus, Cali's going to throw me under the bus. So she recalibrated those alibis and stopped talking about it with Tom.
All right, well, it was already sent down to...
Now, what about the other note? You mentioned in Rolling Stone about another note that he wrote to you.
It's like a letter, and it's not really like a suicide note. It's like, it seems more like it was like in a sealed envelope, and it was just like to me, and it seems like he wrote it in rehab.
Where did you find it?
It was in my bedroom under my pillows.
Under your pillows?
Yeah. And I didn't tell anybody about it but Rosemary, and I told Sergeant Cameron about it.
Yeah.
I let him see it.
There's only one problem with that, Courtney.
What?
I looked under your pillows, just like we looked under your mattresses. That's how I found the right note between your mattresses. That note wasn't under your pillows on the bed.
That suicide note is a pastiche of things that he had written before, I think, and of someone copying his handwriting. This is my theory, and it may be, and it's a lot of it's intuition.
Yeah.
I think all of that weirdness with Cali and being obviously living in the house for several days while there was Kurt's corpse in the other place.